Hi ho there, my name is Ozysturm, a country Victorian gamer of Star Wars Armada, Star Wars Legion, X-Wing, Dystopian Wars, Battletech, Flames of War, and many other games. Today I start a new project for my Star Wars Legion table, a piece of terrain that I purchased from Garfies Games called a Vando Shuttle, Vando. Now, obviously, it's called a Vando because it has the main shape of a van. I also believe that it came in a comic book series, a satire one, about the Solo. But it's not confirmed, that one. So, as you can see, I've received the model. It came in this blue plastic, and it's not a bad model. It also came with the two grey sections for the antenna. And there's two options. I can put it on this side, or you will see later on there's a base covering a hole where I could essentially put it in a horizontal position. Now, what I first noticed when I purchased it is that one of the wings comes down at a 30-degree level while the other one remains straight. Not really a big issue, I found. The other issue that I found with the model is that the underside of it is quite plain. There's no sort of panels or anything. But on the other hand, I don't really need anything on the underside because it's going to be a static display rather than any type of moving. The one issue that I did find, and it may not be the case for all of them, is that the printing process, it produced all of these lines in the model that you can see in the windscreen and throughout the model. Both the top, underside, and everything. And that's from the slices of the plastic that has been printed on top of each other, but it's not clean. Obviously, if I went down the path of using it for anything else, I'd probably get out my Dremel and actually clean it as much as possible. And you can actually see, looking straight up that model, that you've got all of those slices that has been layered on top of each other. I also found that where it was sitting on those two back, on the engines and also on that back panel, was quite rough. So I had to clean them out a little bit. And once I did clean them up, I had to, really put something there. So I just put a little bit of wood panels that I had from some spare terrain and also some plastic kit bits from another game system that I used to play quite often to create a bit of an airlock ramp. All in all, it looks pretty good model, and it's going to be something that I'm going to enjoy painting shortly. Oops. Now, you'll also see that I had to clean this bottom section as it was quite rough as well. And also put in a base on the side which covered up that hole, that the alternative position for the antenna. All up a good model, again. Did have to do a little bit of cleaning in those engine nozzles, but all in up, it's going to be nice for a piece of static terrain for my Legion table. So now I've painted, or at least undercoated, this model with a spray paint of Telerin sand or desert yellow. I'm now going to use this Karak stone or a skeletal bone colour for the two various paint systems that I use to lighten up the model a little bit around the outside edges of the panels as well as to do the main body. I'm going to leave a few bits and pieces of the shuttle itself in this desert yellow colour, or Talon sand colour, as it does look pretty impressive. But I just want to put a little bit on with a small brush to start off with, a size 0 brush, just to see how the paint is going to go on with all of those lines. And what I've discovered is that, yeah, the paint will go on, it'll go nice and smoothly. It's just in some of those gaps between the two lines where it's a little bit low, I guess, I'm going to have to spend a little bit of extra time to draw away the paint to thin it out so that it doesn't clump. I'm going to start with the wing to start off with and work on the outside edges. So I'm going to start from the gun port, I guess you could call it, and the engine exhaust, and draw the paint to the edge of the model. And I want to do this in a couple of stripes just to make sure that they are thinned out, and because I don't want that paint to clump up anywhere. I want to give this nice, clean, thin layer in many ways. The paint seems to be going quite well, and I think generally if I had a spray paint of skeletal bone from the Army Painter series, I would probably have spray painted it in that colour, but unfortunately my can of spray paint at that time had been used up. So just working my way, I'll work around all the model using this streaking technique, but I generally like to try and get at least a few different colours on to start off with, to just test to see how they look and how they compare with each other before I do the main part of the painting process. I find it a little bit easier because if I do need to change a colour, I don't have to change it all the way through the model itself before I find out that it's going to be good or bad. So I'm just going to put some of this Talon sand along the wings tips, and then I'm going to swap it over and put some other paint on just to see how it's going to react to each other. Do they actually look right? So while this is now sped up and I'm painting quite a lot of the edges, I find that obviously you, the audience, may not want to watch a slow motion camera, so I have deliberately sped up the framework. As you can see, I'm painting the edges, now I'm painting the underside, and it's a really good shot of seeing the underside having nothing in the way of texture or in the way of exposed paneling, etc. But again, it's going to be a static model, so I won't need to do too much in the way of trying to do anything underneath. So once I've finished here, I'm going to go and slow it down very shortly and put some bolt gun metal onto some of the engine cowling. And also potentially on some of the other bare metal areas that I'm going to include in my terrain piece, I guess. As mentioned, I want to make sure that the paint works well with this color, which it does. I did initially think it might be too bright, but if I use a wash of some sort later on down the track, That should darken it ever so slightly and make it look a little bit more, I guess, grimier than something that you would see more so as part of a flashy model. My thoughts is that I don't want this medal to look like the Naboo fighter from Mandalorian Season 2. I want it to look like more old scrap pieces of metal that hasn't been buffed up but is generally serviceable for an engine. Now, I'm also going to paint the inside of this engine in this same metal color because the engine is going to be cold. I don't like the idea of putting a actual color in the engine unless it's supposed to be shown that it's moving. I'm also going to use this metal color on the barrels of the guns on this, I guess you could call it maybe a quad blaster on the side or a quad laser cannon on the side. I'm not going to do the actual tips with the color. I'm going to leave that as that Talaran yellow. And I'm also going to try with this paint to cover as much of the barrel as possible, because the spray paint that I undercoated it did leave some gaps that you may or may not be able to see in those recesses between the barrels, between the likes of the sensors array, and generally trying to make it as clean as possible. Once I'm happy with the color, then I'm going to go back to this crack stone and work through painting the rest of it, which again I'm going to speed up to save on time, and then I will show you the next section shortly. So I've done a little bit more than what I thought during the period of time between my last segment and this segment. I've actually gone and used some Abaddon Black to do the windscreens. I've also used a green to do some of the edging. Completed doing all of the metal parts for the likes of the sensor dish, the engine cowling, and some of the back sections. And now I'm going to start working on doing a few more bits and pieces with the model. The green that I chose is, I believe, a Caliban green, but to me it felt slightly lacking. So I'm going to introduce this Memphis red color along the edges of the wings, like trying to do like a pinstripe sort of thing. I did paint some of the inside of the antenna, and I will be gluing that at some point soon, but I wanted to get all of the paint for the rear of that antenna done first. But getting back to that Memphis red, I just want to do like a little streak along the edges and use that to define the actual wing tips. Obviously there's nothing there that I can actually draw it against, so it's all going to be freehand. Some people suggested that I may wanted to try and do like a tape line. However, I found that sometimes with models that have that bumpiness in it, the tapes don't always stick well. And then when you pull the actual paint tape off, sometimes it takes the underlayer of paint with it, depending on the strength of the paint. So in all, I'm just going to freehand it and just generally take it easy with my strokes. Just take it gently, just do as wide as the brush itself for the top section, and then further define it later on once I've got that line in place and I'm happy with it, or if I've made any mistakes, that I can actually try and clean it up afterwards to just make it look even between the two. I'm also going to leave some of those gaps in the wing itself, where if it was an Earthship, one would say that it's the air intake for both sides of the wings. Or I guess seeing it's the Star Wars universe, it could be that very front one for a missile system. And then the one behind it is more for some sort of air intake here in atmosphere. I'm also painting the side pretty solid while leaving the top edge thin in terms of volume. And also I'm going to leave those sections that have a lot more contour along the inside of the wing blank, so that I can come back with like a null oil to give it some further different definition. I also want to paint the underside with this same line as light as possible, even though no one will pretty much see it, but I will see it. So just doing that quite nicely, lightly, and eventually balancing up both sides. Now, I did have to come back and work on this a couple of times, and I found that just leaving the back flap, which is a slightly different thickness than the rest of the wing, a little bit odd. So I took some inspiration from some of the, I guess, sci-fi fighter jets that we've seen over the years, from the likes of Battletech, from the likes of Macross Saga and stuff like that. And I'm just going to paint that whole thinner area in a red as well. Now, working on the underside, I did have to take care, as that, I guess, wingtip on the back edge is not a straight line when compared with the slices of the printing of the model itself. So I did have to take a little bit of time to work it in. I'm going to leave that gap bare without colour. It may mean that the owner may have just painted the top side of it and never bothered to paint on the inside. A lot of it's really unknown what might have gone in that middle section. And as you can see, it on this side of the wing, it looks pretty good. Now I need to do the other side. I need to replicate as much of that lining process down the edges the same as both sides, as well as even on both sides. As for my paints, as you can see, most of the time I'm using a lot of the Games Workshop style paints. I find that they have a lot of range, and it's pretty good availability in many places. There's a lot of stores that usually stock Games Workshop stuff, and although I do play Games Workshop store items, so I do have games like Blood Bowl, Fantasy, 40k Necromunda, things like that. Having that large range of paints is such a bonus, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got every single paint color that you need, which is why I regularly swap between the various Valero game color, the army painter range, and this range. With both sides of the wing done, now I can start working on some of the more defined areas. Areas where I'm going to use this gunmetal to paint in the barrels, some of the sections of exposed sensors, as well any exposed piping. So I'm going to start working along this line right here. Looks like there might be 2 ridges that might be like pipes along the side, as well as in this sensor area. There's like 3 little bumps. I'm not exactly certain what they might be. They might be sensors, navigational aids, or even, I guess you could say, countermeasures, or it could just be just bits and pieces. I'm also going to do a little bit of the metal color around the pivot point for the wing, both on the top side and the underside. It looks like this pivot point, which when looked from afar is a complete circle, might be where the wing is either totally attached to the model, so that that wing that is on the 30-degree angle might be able to be shifted flat for some reason, and while they're working on it, maintenance on the planetary surface, they've just dropped it for whatever reason. I'm also going to do this little vent area in this metal. Again, I'm not entirely certain with the design of the actual shuttle what components they are, but I'm going to use my knowledge of some of the Star Wars vessels that I have played with and actually have in my own collections for Star Wars X-Wing to try and at least approximate as to what each part on this shuttle could represent. Now, at the moment, I'm just painting on the rivets that are on the airlock. I think that seeing this is a little bit of a beat-up type shuttle, I'm wanting to make sure that it just doesn't look like it's been well maintained, and I'll probably use a little bit of wash later on to give it a bit more of a rusting effect. Either way, the airlock is going to be non-functioning, seeing it's pretty much stationary. I won't colour every part of it in, so the hatch and that will keep the colours, but the likes of some of the joinery or where the bolts may be placed on the actual vehicle itself, I'm going to do it in this bolt metal, just to, I guess, give the model more color context. So now I'm just doing like a light coat on the batteries or fuse boxes, whatever you'd like to think of it is, and also just do a small circle around the top of that I guess shield generator area in the middle as well. At this point now I can do some of the rails that are on the top and also some more of the barrels, as well as doing this exposed piping that is on this side of the shuttle. Just taking care to fill in as much of the detail as possible, and then use a bit of the wash to actually, I guess, cover the recesses behind it or underneath some of it. At this point, we're going to use some flesh wash to create a bit of rusting effects at the base. I'm going to use a pretty heavy streaks, not so much watered down on the base, simply to give it that bit of dark tonal colour to start off with. And then I'm going to use a technique of watering down or removing as much of that flesh wash as possible using a similar brush, and just either by using it in some water or alternatively just dry to remove some of it. This gives the effect of smoothing out some of the start and stops, as well as giving you the opportunity to just blend shade some of that rusting effects on now the sides of the model, as well as some of the underside. It basically means that you're not wasting too much of it. And I do generally find that where it pools anyway on a model is usually where the recesses are anyway. So as you can see, that idea of just brushing a little bit of the flesh wash across the model is now darkening some of the shading areas. Obviously, I don't need to do it everywhere, but it just means that that shade gives the model now a bit more of a look of it's been worn. At this point, I want to work from the bottom up. Generally, most things will rust at the bottom or closest to the ground first, and then progressively work its way up. So the higher I go on the model, the lighter I want it to be, or the less shade that I want in it. We now just want to put a little bit of this null oil wash on the likes of the screens. This gives the effect of a little bit of a glow or a reflective nature to the windscreens. I'll also use a little bit of this null oil on the top where the railings are, as well as any vents. Just as another shading example, or giving the model a bit more depth. As well as covering some of the recesses on the likes of the metal. As I said in earlier sections, that I was going to do the sides in this null oil as well. And just do some of the lines. And there, pretty much it all looks quite nice. I do have a little bit more to go with this. Obviously, I need to do some varnishing, but essentially that is going to be it for this model. So please like, subscribe, leave a comment if you're interested. Again, this is the Vando Shuttle from Garfies Games on eBay. You are more than able to purchase this from other companies as well. And here are some Star Wars Legion models for comparison. Goodbye from now, and I'll see you on the table.